Hello and welcome to the Amateur Austenite. My name is Frances Duncan. I am an author and the founder of the Jane Austen Society of New Zealand. My very special guest with me today is my friend Sian.
Hello.
And today we are discussing chapter 60 of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And in chapter 60, Lizzie and Darcy discuss their relationship and they tell the wider family about their engagement.
You made the comment you didn't see the need for this chapter. Why do you think that?
It feels like they're engaged, the story's over.
Now, isn't that a modern thing where they get married and that's it and over and done with?
I mean, yes, we do kind of want to know what everybody's reactions were, and we do get a really good sense of the feelings of the whole cast of characters. So there's lots of letters mentioned in this, and from that we get perspectives of everyone without them having to go and visit, although Charlotte and Mr. Collins do come to visit.
I love that little visit, which is very much the result of Darcy's letter to Lady Catherine.
Charlotte runs away.
Yes, and she wants to have her olive branch in peace and quiet, I should think. But I love this chapter because it's the opportunity to see Darcy, not in his new persona, but in his ability to actually tolerate and handle those very infuriating characters, which it quite clearly says that are actually also not as pleasing as well to Elizabeth. I mean, let's be honest, Elizabeth did an awful lot of walking to get away from some of the characters that she didn't, her own family members.
Society so little pleasing to either.
Both, yes.
Yes.
She knows she owes them affection as family and she does love them, but she really doesn't enjoy their company for very long periods of time, particularly when they are so very good at mortifying her. And I think we all remember times when either we were mortified either by our own children or by our parents particularly. I really quite like that, and the fact that he's learned how to cope with it, his strategies for dealing with it and accepting it.
It does show that he's actually changed, that he's willing to put up with these people, whereas in the past he wouldn't have.
I think it's more, she's given him confidence, and she makes the point that she loves him for himself. All the other stuff's nice, but and obviously very, very useful, the Pemberley and the joke she makes earlier to Jane about, I thought I loved him when I saw Pemberley. But the reality is she would have known how wealthy he was. She always knew how wealthy she was when he went to Kent. And she could quite easily then have said yes, even without loving him, if it was just the money. It was just about the money and the security and so forth. I think that's given him a real confidence in himself, because it is hard when you're in a position like that as to know who's actually friends with you for your money and your situation, who's truly your friend.
I think that's the great thing, and Lizzie talks about that he was sick of people that toadied to him, that he wanted someone that treated him like an actual person, and because she disliked him, she didn't treat him very well, but he almost admired that because she was honest about her feelings.
And he liked arguments, and a lot of their discussions throughout in the early part, when he's staying at Netherfield, discussions and things about books and comments and everything, he enjoyed that challenge of somebody who would disagree with his opinions, and it's almost like he would make a statement just for the sake of hearing her disagree with him.
Yes, they're both quite argumentative people, I think. And that's how they flirt.
It's certainly how Lizzie flirts.
When he is talking about his feelings for her, she asked why he was grave and silent, and he said, I was embarrassed. And she said, you might have talked to me more when you came to dinner. And he says, a man who had felt less might, which reminds me of Mr. Knightley and Emma.
Very like. Yes.
The same sort of, a man, if I loved you less, I could talk about it more. The same sort of thing, that a real gentleman doesn't express his feelings.
Well, particularly not when they don't want to do it in a flirty way. When you're in that sort of environment, it's very difficult to do it without being just perceived as being, I don't know, a Wickham type character, really.
You don't want to be confessing your feelings to everyone.
Exactly. He may have changed, but he's still a very private man.
We were discussing before about whether he would have made a move if she hadn't said anything about thanking him for Lydia, and he says, I'm not indebted for my present happiness to your eager desire of expressing your gratitude. I was not in humour to wait for any opening of yours. So he would have just gone ahead with it whether she had said, thank you for my sister.
In fact, if anything, he would have been more concerned that she might say yes out of gratitude. And he didn't want that. He didn't want her to feel indebted to him rather.
And she talks about Lady Catherine having been of use, which we were talking about in the other chapter as well.
Oh, we love that one, yes.
Which ought to make her happy, for she loves to be of use.
Little did she know.
His avowed reason for coming to visit was to see whether Jane was still partial to Bingley, but his real purpose was to see Lizzie and to judge whether he ever might make her love him. I love that he's still hiding it from himself, despite all of that.
Well, I think sometimes you do. If you're very afraid of disappointment, you'll often lower your expectations. So you're pleasantly surprised when things go better than you've expressed. How many people do you, when you know they're going to get an A grade for an exam and they say, I'm sure I've failed. And it's like, come off it, lass. Be honest with yourself. You know damn well you've not failed, But they always go, as a C student who was grateful to get anything like 51%, it was like that false modesty is very irritating. Not that I'm suggesting that he has false modesty, but he did not necessarily know how she was going to react even after all this time.
Because they still haven't had that much time together.
No.
They spend a lot of the book apart. Lots of time to think about their feelings.
Yes. In the real world, she could have met somebody else, particularly visiting with the gardeners and things like that. So there was always the chance that she might have met somebody else somewhere along the lines if he waited too long.
So he's quite lucky she was still waiting for him, really.
I think nothing would have happened until after Jane and Bingley married, but at that point, of course, Jane and Bingley still hadn't got engaged, though. And there would have always been the fear whether, even though the Lydia and Wickham situation had been hushed up, it was still well known to some of the key characters, and you could not necessarily know how they might react. And Bingley, to his credit, withstood his sisters back there in London would have been making quite clear that Jane was not the Bennets were not a suitable family now that they'd disgraced themselves by one of the daughters running off with Wickham. That puts Bingley in a better light than's actually been portrayed.
Because everyone just sort of assumes, well, of course he's going to go and propose to Jane now that Darcy's told him. But you don't know about the pressures he's getting from everywhere else.
And Darcy didn't tell him
until after they'd
both been together again and seen. And when I first read that, I thought that was a little bit mean to Jane, because he wasn't able to tell before. But now I think he had a better understanding of how Jane was, and also if he thought about himself. And, I think in some respects he could see himself in Jane in terms of being very careful about getting hurt and things, so hiding behind a particular shield, although hers was so much more polite than his, to say the least. So Bingley went without still knowing that Jane was still in love with him. So that, again, I think is a credit to Bingley, that he was still willing to try, and of course you could tell he was still enamoured of Jane when he met with Lizzie at Pemberley. So I think that's quite clever, and I think really Darcy waiting. What if he'd said something to Bingley beforehand? Would Bingley have then felt obliged if he'd maybe fallen out of love? Because he could have been a bit of he's a young man. He could have been flighty, out of sight, out of mind. But obviously, they obviously still were well suited to each other. So I think really, but you're right. The reality is that he wanted to go and see Lizzie.
Now, there's an awful lot of letters mentioned in this chapter, which I wonder if it's condensed quite a lot. Whereas in, the first draft, which was all in letters, or so family history tells us, this chapter would have gone on and on and on and on and on, because there's the letter to Aunt Gardner, there's a letter to Lady Catherine, there's a letter to Mr. Collins,
which is lovely,
which is hilarious and so short. There's a letter from Miss Bingley and a letter from Miss Darcy. So that's 5 letters that have been condensed into this chapter.
You could see the letter to Mr. Collins has obviously hit a note.
He has more to give. That's exactly the line we were remembering from that letter.
It is, isn't it? And his behaviour to Mr. Darcy when he's back on deck.
His parading inconspicuous civility.
Yes.
Which is a shame because Lizzie wants to see Charlotte. But Mr. Darcy puts up with Mr. Collins despite him being difficult.
I think if Charlotte gets a chance to get him away from Lady Catherine and over time, because that's not behaviour that Mr. Darcy likes, and it's not necessarily behaviour that all seniors would like. It's very much a behaviour that Lady Catherine enjoys.
So you think that Mr. Collins might change his behaviour to fix the people?
He might improve. I think he'll always be, because he has little confidence, really. He has confidence in his so-called position, and he takes, I've made I am a vicar, I am a minister, therefore I am important, rather than I can add to the position, as it were.
And Mrs. Phillips is another family member who embarrasses poor Lizzie. But she stood too much in awe of Mr. Darcy to speak with a familiarity which Mr. Bingley's good humour encouraged. Which is the same as her sister. So I have this picture of them. Yeah, they are. I just imagine them looking up to Mr. Darcy and then running away like frightened mice.
And they would be looking up because they'd be tiny in comparison.
Yes, because he's quite tall, isn't he?
Yeah.
Tall, noble mien. Lizzie's letter to Mrs. Gardiner is quite funny. I was too cross to write. You supposed more than really existed. But now you may suppose as much as you choose. Give a loose to your fancy. Indulge your imagination in every possible flight which the subject will afford. And unless you believe me actually married, you cannot greatly err. I love that her voice carries over into her letters. That she's still funny.
She's still teasing. She'll always be teasing. I don't like books that end abruptly. I like to sort of them fade out, as it were, into the little snippets afterwards.
Well, we don't have to wonder what everybody's reactions were in this book. It tells you.
Yes.
It's like, right, we're getting married, the end.
But as we all know, that's not necessarily the end, is it?
And that is our summary of chapter 60 of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. My name is Frances Duncan. You can find me at francisduncanwrites.com and on Twitter at francis_Duncan. Thank you for listening, and we wish you happy reading.